Good morning. It was cold and rainy. Some called it winter's last gasp. However, it seemed to me that winter had had so many last gasps that year that it must have been on life support. Perhaps it wasn't the weather at all. Maybe it was just the condition of my soul. God seemed so distant, so far away. I didn't even know how to get back to him. This was a time that John Wesley would have called a wilderness wandering, a time when it seems like it's a spiritual drought. How does it happen? Why does it happen? What do you do about it? Well, in that season of my life, devoid of cell phone or pager, it had been one of those days in which the demands had been awfully high. I was on my fourth trip to the hospital that day, primarily because people seemed to consider notifying the minister as an afterthought, but they still expected me to be there. That ordinarily would not have been a problem, but in this case, I was more than 30 miles from the hospital. That fact alone had put me on the highway almost nonstop all day long. As I left the hospital for my fourth time, wondering if there was going to be a fifth time that day, I discovered how distant I felt. I knew that I had to do something. At that moment, I saw a music store, so I stopped in and inquired of the young clerk as to where I might find some Christian music. He pointed way back to the back of the store, and I went back and I found what I needed. I bought a couple of cassette tapes. Yes, that was back in the days of cassette tapes, so that I could play them in my car as I drove on my way back home. As I got back on the highway, I inserted one of the tapes into the player. When the music began to play, suddenly something began to happen to me. It was like I had just been reintroduced to an old friend. Unexplainably, my eyes began to overrun with tears, and I began to sense the cold, steel grip that winter held on my soul falling away, one song at a time. I wonder, have you ever been there? Have you ever known such a time in which your soul felt more like a desert than an oasis? Could it be that you're going through such a time now? It isn't a place we plan to go, nor is it a place we desire. We may be just going along, living life, and wake up one morning wondering how we got so far away. That's the way it happens. We become so involved in the process of living that we forget to live. Our text today came from 1 Timothy chapter 6, the last part of verse 2 down through verse 10. And in that passage, Paul cautions us about focusing on the things surrounding our lives rather than our relationship with God. Turning toward worldly concerns of our lives, we easily become distracted. And when that occurs, we may find ourselves far removed from the close communion and fellowship that we know our spirits long for with the God of the universe and the Lord of our lives. Paul really captures it well in Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 through 23, when he says, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. When we look at our lives, I wonder, are these traits or characteristics that we find manifested in us? It may be fitting for us to consider the following questions today. Question number 1. When is the last time you found yourself in a spiritual wilderness? When is the last time you found yourself in a spiritual wilderness? Question 2. In Galatians 5, Paul also describes the works of the flesh along with the fruit of the Spirit. Which list describes your life and why? In Galatians 5, Paul also describes the work of the flesh along with the fruit of the Spirit. Which list describes your life and why? Question 3. Of all of the fruit of the Spirit that Paul lists, which do you desire the most? What must you do for your life to bear such fruit? Of all of the fruit of the Spirit that Paul lists, which do you desire the most? What must you do for your life to bear such fruit? I trust that these questions will be meaningful to you, and that you will that you will journal them, and that you'll look back upon them, reflect upon them, and that these meditations, these questions, and these thoughts will help you as we launch out in this new normal, being the church in changing times. I do pray that you'll have a great day, and God bless.